If you have primary school-aged kids or grandkids, we have some very exciting news.
Vision Kids!
Vision Kids is streaming now in the Vision app and online. For decades, Vision has broadcast Adventures in Odyssey as part of Kids Stuff every weekday. Thanks to your faithful support and prayers, that's now expanded to an online radio stream featuring a selection of world-class radio dramas, kids' music and friendly voices 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
24/7 and just for us.
Vision Kids is now streaming in the Vision app and online at visionkids.org.au. If you don't already have the app on your phone or tablet, you can download it for free when you search Vision Christian Media in your app store.
We are the future. We are Vision Kids.
A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, hoping that 2024 is off to a good start and things are going well for you. But statistics, if they're correct, not everyone is rolling in money and living the luxury high life. In fact, news headlines are telling us there are a record number of Australians at risk of mortgage stress, and thousands more if interest rates rise again. According to Roy Morgan, more than 1.6 million households were at risk of mortgage stress in January. But it's not just interest rate rises that can create financial crisis. No one's immune from health or relationships or career crisis. So we're opening a conversation today seeking some biblically inspired wisdom on navigating financial challenges that come our way. And our absolute privilege once again to be back with finance expert Alex Cook. Alex is a former stockbroker, he's been a successful financial planner, and he is the founder of Wealth with Purpose. His ministry is to help equip Christians to honour God with their finances by teaching sound financial skills. Alex Cook, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be back again this week.
Alex, interest rates just for a moment. The next RBA meeting, ordinarily it would have been on today in the old regime, but there's a new plan now and they're only meeting 8 times a year. The next time they meet will be on the 18th of March. And so I wonder whether, though, it's a good opportunity to just touch on how you're seeing things, our economic situation in Australia. What are things looking like?
Yeah, okay. Well, look, a couple of things, and some positive and some obviously not necessarily going in the direction we'd like. The good news, and really the good news, really is that Australia's had very low unemployment. It is starting to come up a little bit. And given we do
Alex, just let me cut in for a moment because, there's sort of a little bit of interference and our line is not fabulous. Whatever there might be that you can adjust at your end there. I think it might be coming from your end, but let's just start again. Where do you think we're at economically?
Yeah, so look, I mean, on the positive side, we've got low unemployment at the moment, and it is ticking up a little bit. The most recent figures suggest that it's going up to about 4.1%, but overall, it's still very, very low. And that's been one of the good things for the economy, in that those that want a job, generally speaking, have been able to have one. The other positive thing is inflation has been coming down, which is very good news, although it's not to be confused with prices coming down. I'm sure many listeners realise that prices are still going up. They're just not going up at the same pace. And the good news about that is if inflation does continue to fall, then rate rises will hopefully have come to an end. Now, there's still speculation, obviously, as to what's going to happen this year. And people are optimistic, I think. Some economists are saying that even by the end of the year, we may see rates come down. I think that may turn out to be optimistic. It'll just depend on how much the economy slows down. But just in talking to people, I think there's a general sense that we're in a sort of a semi-recession already. What's interesting is that a technical recession is when you have 2 negative quarters of GDP growth. Now, because Australia has turbocharged immigration at the moment, GDP is positive by about 1%, just thereabouts, but population growth is at 2%. So if you do what we call GDP per capita Australia is in a GDP per capita recession, if you want to call it that, which simply means in real terms, most of us feel like our living standards are declining. And I think when I talk to people, just in general, anecdotal, you do sense that there's people feeling a lot of pressure and being forced to cut back and, put more into their rent, put more into their mortgage, and that is affecting certain elements of the population. In saying that, some parts of the population, particularly baby boomers, are going gangbusters. If you own your own home and you're 60 plus, then there's a good chance that you're generally doing pretty well. That's once again not true of everyone, but certainly the baby boomers seem to be the generation that's not too affected by what's happening at the moment. So it's very mixed. And then if you look in the investment markets, most markets are reaching all-time highs at the moment. The Australian stock market, the US, I don't know if people saw Bitcoin the other day hit 100,000. You've got gold also at record highs. So things are looking very frothy, if you ask me, in markets. In fact, I think they look a bit expensive, and you'd expect at some stage we're going to get a bit of a pullback. But certainly, it's going to be a mixed year. Some areas of the economy, like commercial property, are particularly weak, and we're seeing a commercial property in the US that you would expect to play out similarly here as well. Because one of the big trends, of course, since COVID is that many people are still working from home a couple of days a week. And so many companies realize they don't need the office space they had before. So that's leading, of course, to valuations in commercial properties coming down. So it's a very mixed bag, but that's some of the short-term things. And then obviously there's long-term things that I'm much more concerned about in terms of the long-term prosperity of Australia.
Alex, we were talking about some of the impacts in our own economy here in Australia. A few thoughts on things that are impacting us internationally. We're talking about some short-term issues that are affecting our economy right now, but I wonder if you've got a thought or two about what we might be in for in the medium or longer term. And while no one can predict these things accurately, what are your best thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think we're living in a fascinating period. We're really entering the age of disruption. One thing that many listeners may have noticed in the last 3 months is the rocket that's occurred under the stock market in relation to artificial intelligence. And that, of course, is going to be very disruptive, both in a positive way, but also in a negative way. I mean, there's all sorts of different estimates out there as to how many people will be laid off from their jobs as they get replaced by artificial intelligence. Now, I know that kind of thing makes people nervous. I tend to look at these changes like the internet, and even if you go back further, the introduction of the computers, I tend to view them as a positive, and they often lead to better standards of living. In saying that, they're always disruptive when they first occur. So the positive thing is we're going to see things, our lives become a lot more productive. Some things will become easier. Maybe some things will become a bit more Orwellian too with the technology that we're starting to see. But certainly I think the concern will be the change in the labour market that occurs. There is a view, as I say, that up to 25% of people may lose their jobs as they get replaced. And so the issue with that will be how quickly does it happen? Does it happen really quickly and happens in the space of 2 or 3 years, or does it happen more like over a 10, 15-year period? I hope certainly it happens much slower, and that way people have a chance to adjust, to reskill, to change industries, all of those kind of things. So that's one really big one, and we'll have net positives, net negatives. I know people often get nervous when they hear these technology replacing, but I often think it's an age of opportunity as well in many respects. Probably the bigger one I have, though, that applies especially to the Western world, as we go further and further away from God, as our societies turn their back on God, you are going to see this ongoing reduction in prosperity in our nations. And I think we're already seeing that already. Government policy has meant that house prices now across the vast majority of Australia are very unaffordable. I often have people say to me, "Oh, Alex, my kids will never own a home." That gets said to me minimum once a week. And then I have people saying, "Oh, my kids are leaving the big cities to go somewhere else." So that kind of thing, what we're seeing, I think, is a decline as a middle class and a general loss in prosperity that's happening slowly over time. But it's not happening just in Australia, it's happening all throughout the Western world. And I think whilst it's a lot of it's due to poor policy and poor government policy. I think it's really the inevitable outcome of a society that turns its back on God. When you do that, when you take out the wisdom of God from society, you inevitably reap negative consequences. And I think that's the long-term trajectory we're on. So, but God can change that. And, of course, I pray revival, and then you have a changing of the hearts of the Australian people. And that's what we need, I think, to regain, prosperity in the nation.
Interesting just to dwell on this for a few moments, because sometimes we don't always mentally link a reduction in prosperity to a reduction in Christian values. But when we think of a economy, our heritage, which has those Christian foundations, it's created the soil in which the prosperity has been able to grow. So when people are thinking about prosperity, sometimes they're detaching religiousness or their Christian faith from that. But this is really very linked in a significant way, isn't it, Alex?
Extremely. And probably there's a couple of examples that I'd give, but one is in socialist societies. In socialist societies, you end up with often a ruling elite that control everything and have all the power, and everyone else is struggling. But human beings, being what they are, they don't want to struggle, they want to do well. And so in those societies where they feel they can't get ahead, they feel it's rigged against them, people start cheating and the society becomes very dysfunctional. And you see that in lots of parts of the world that become very socialist. And I think that's a risk for Australia. As more and more people get fed up with the system and they feel that they're, it's not looking after them, they'll start becoming, their behaviour will change. And of course, I think that's a big risk what we're seeing. The other thing I say is, one of my favourite verses is Deuteronomy 8:18. It says, "Remember the Lord, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth." And what I think you've witnessed over the last 50 years, where you've had unprecedented prosperity in much of the Western world, is as that we've become wealthier and wealthier, we've turned our back on God. And, I think many wealthy Australians kind of have the view, and wealthy people in general, just think, I don't need God. And so when that happens, I think that's the turning point, because as soon as you forget God and you take God out of the picture, anything goes. And that's what we're starting to see across the way the direction the nation's heading. So I think Christian values, the morality attached to it, the Protestant work ethic. If you ever read any history books, I'll talk about the Protestant work ethic and how that helped shape the West. It's one of the competitive edges of the West. So all those things are positives that Christianity brings to society. And also volunteerism. You think about how much benefit voluntary behaviour brings to the economy. And of course, over the last 10, 20 years, voluntary behaviour has been in decline in Australia. And so that's what happens, as I say, when you take faith and Christian faith out of the picture. And so I think it's that inevitable decline that we're going to see. But there is hope, because God can turn around. And that's why the church and us, our responsibility as believers, is to use our money for good purposes, to fund the kingdom, to advance the gospel.
There are some big challenges, and interesting to hear your thoughts there, because sometimes we don't connect the dots in the way that you've just explained so beautifully. Alex, as we get underway in this segment, let's talk about some of the common financial challenges right now that people are facing. We've been talking a little about mortgage stress and the pressure that's there. What are the main ones from your side that we ought to be very cautious about, or that we need actually some special insight to be able to navigate? Thoughts from you?
Yeah, well, there are some common ones, although I'd like to say up front, there are good solutions, or certainly good things you can do to prevent them. Obviously, we can't control the future, right? So one of the big ones, for example, is job loss. It's very common that when economies slow down, many people find themselves with an unexpected redundancy. I know I've personally been through that. That must be 20 years ago now, but I remember distinctly going through being made redundant. In fact, I even had a funny one where I was made redundant before I even started a job. I don't know if any listeners can beat that one, getting made redundant before you've even started. But anyway, the point is these things are often unexpected, and from a financial perspective, the main thing is that we allow for this kind of thing in the way we set up our finances. So the really obvious one with potential job loss is that we have emergency funds available, because ultimately, redundancy is, it's part of, any economic life, and it is a risk for many of us, unless we're self-employed, that we might lose our jobs, or a company goes broke, all those possibilities that lead to us finding ourselves unemployment. And of course, the big one at the moment is if artificial intelligence does take off in the way that some people are predicting, then some people might find they're being replaced by a computer, which sounds very depressing. But nonetheless, we can prepare for it through the use of having emergency funds and building up reserves. So job loss is obviously a very common financial challenge. The other one, of course, in our society, I don't remember exactly what the divorce rate is, but I'd say it's at least, 40% of the population these days. And of course, that kind of relationship breakdown often leads to, all sorts of different scenarios. Sometimes, one person ends up with the kids and ends up with a lot more of the expenses. Sometimes the household income, one partner hadn't been working for 20 years because they were raising the kids. There's all these sort of potential complications that can come out of divorce. And that's a tough one, because it often involves having to rebuild. And of course, if people get remarried, then there's often a new need to rebuild trust. So there's the risk that when you remarry, that you bring some of that, if you like, challenges from your previous marriage into the new one because of the trust breakdown. So that's once again another common one. Possibly the other one that I see as a financial planner, and this is the one that I think most people, it's kind of they don't think it'll ever happen to them, is health issues. So as a financial planner, we obviously sell insurance to the general public, and every year we see people making claims. So for example, last year I had a couple of breast cancer claims for clients that had what we call critical illness policies. And so it makes an enormous difference if you have the insurance in place when these unexpected things come along. What most people fall into the trap is they say, I'm young and healthy, or I've never had to go to a doctor, and they have all these, if you like, preconceived ideas. But the reality is, if you look at the stats, 1 in 4 Australians, I think it is, will have at least 6 months off work during their working life due to ill health. So it's a big risk, and of course it may mean, struggle then to repay the mortgage or the rent because of the health issues that have kicked in. In fact, I was chatting to someone earlier who'd fallen down a flight of stairs back in January and hasn't been able to go to work since, while they're waiting for all the ligaments and stuff to recover. So there's all these kind of things that we don't plan for. And sometimes we think, workers' comp will cover it, but maybe workers' comp won't cover it because it wasn't work-related, or we don't have enough insurance in place to protect us. So as I said, with a lot of these financial challenges, there are good solutions, which we can chat about now, but certainly, and the one you mentioned, of course, Neil, was mortgage pressure, which I think many listeners could obviously relate to at the moment.
So we've got there's 4 scenarios there. Mortgage pressure and, the excessive debt that we've built up sometimes works against us. We've got job losses, and we've got divorce or a breakdown in relationships, and you've got poor health. So there's 4 areas there, and there's common financial challenges that we might all need to be prepared for. You touched on something I think which I think is common for some of our conversations here, is the preparedness in advance. The assumption that some of these things may well confront us into the future, and so preparedness is one of those things that, as the Christian believer, you're being a steward and you're taking responsibility. Where do you think our Christian connections to preparedness comes in here, Alex?
Look, it's spot on, and as one of my favourite proverbs says, a sensible man prepares for problems, sees problems ahead and prepares to meet them. The simpleton never looks and suffers the consequences. It's a fabulous passage in Proverbs. And what I think that tells us is that most of us will have seen these types of events affect people we know. We may have seen a friend that's lost a job. We may have a loved family member who's gotten sick. We may have had a friend get divorced, etc. So all of these scenarios, in one sense, they're not unusual. In other words, most of us have seen them impact other people. And so, therefore, as the Bible says, a sensible man prepares for problems ahead and prepares to meet them. And the good news is, with each of these issues, there are simple things you can do in order to prepare for those things. And the way I sort of pitch these things to people in terms of being prepared is to think like, in football, particularly American football, they have an offensive team and they have a defensive team. Well, I think you can apply that same concept to our finances. So the defensive strategies that we can apply to our finances, they're more about preparing for the worst. So, for example, if we think about our health issues, we can have insurances in place to protect our loved ones in the event that we're unable to work due to ill health or accident or even passing away prematurely. So that's a defensive strategy. But on the flip side, there's offensive strategies. Now, these are more the positive ones about preparing for the future. So things like, saving a percentage of your income, having clear goals that you can work towards, becoming financially literate, so learning just the basics about money so that you can make good, wise decisions. So they're your kind of offensive strategies. But then, as I said, there's the defensive ones, which is more about preparing for the worst, like things like job loss. As I say, most of us will have either experienced it in our own life or know of others. So having things like an emergency fund. With AI coming along, maybe we need to think about our career and think, what alternatives are there? When it comes to mortgages, we may be able to refinance our home loan and bring the loan repayments down. Maybe we even have to make tough decisions like downsizing the family home to reduce our debt. There's all those little things that we can do that can take the pressure off and help us meet these challenges. But as you say, I think you really hit the nail on the head with the expression preparedness. By being prepared, you can actually prevent a lot of these problems. And that's I think the wisdom of it.
Preparedness, this is an interesting diversion here, because one of the things you mentioned as a common financial challenge is in regard to divorce, relationship breakdown. And it's interesting because I'm going to ask you to comment here on some relationship issues, and maybe this is Alex Cook's opportunity to be involved in a marriage enrichment, because when we talk about divorce, oftentimes, and you might have your own perspectives here, but oftentimes that tearing in two of what was joined together as one oftentimes leads to a fast track to poverty. So is there a sense in which your marriage, your family actually becomes so important, but is also there's a financial wisdom element of that, because together you're a whole lot better than if you're torn apart? Any thoughts here around finance and divorce? What are your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, well, I guess the biblical model, and when I think about why God, created marriage and so forth, really God created this amazing structure, the family unit of man and woman and raising a family is this amazing structure when you think about it. And, often you hear it in a wedding when you hear the passage where, it talks about the cord of three strands not easily broken, and the idea that, two becoming one. All of those sort of biblical concepts that we see in marriage are really about bringing a structure together that protects everybody. So if one falls down, which is what the Bible says, if one falls down, the other is there to pick them up. And likewise, with our kids, we raise our kids and help them when they fall over and they make their mistakes. And of course, what I'm seeing in not only my own life, but in others as well, and clients, is in old age, it gets reversed. That the adult parents who were once the children are now helping their old age parents. And so the family unit that God created is this amazing structure designed to bless society and protect each of us by making sure there's always someone there. And that's why, there's one very harsh passage where it says, those who don't look after their own family are worse than an unbeliever. I mean, that's because, you can't just walk away from your family. You've got to be there and look after them. And there's all sorts of, obviously, interpretations around that particular passage. But the point is, it's an amazing structure. And so how does this apply to our finances as a couple and as a marriage? To me, what it means is when we look at our money, we look at it not as his or hers, which when you do look at it as his and hers, that often is what can cause divorce in the first place because, we have this it's mine kind of mentality. Whereas as a believer, I've actually got to flip that and say, no, actually it's God's money, and together we need to work out what God wants us to do with it. That's our responsibility as a couple. And that actually leads to a lot more interesting and unique conversations that will help our marriage. It won't solve a job loss problem per se, but it will certainly mean that we're coming together in unity with a heart that is about serving God and doing it God's way. And when we adopt that principle, it's going to be much better for our marriage. And certainly what it's going to ultimately lead to, if it's done well, is the alignment of our finances with God's word. Because two believers coming together, praying for the finances, working together to honour God with their finances is going to lead to far better outcomes for the family, but of course also, importantly, for God's kingdom. Because ultimately the purpose of money is to glorify God. And that often gets lost, particularly in financial challenges. That's often what gets lost.
So there's some inspiration there for holding things together, for ensuring that your marriage is protected and you can do some things to enrich that marriage because there is a financial benefit to actually staying together. Let's talk through those things because for a lot of listeners, they might be thinking, well, it's all very well to think about holding a marriage together and there's a financial benefit to that, but what about when the horse is already bolted and there are challenges and people have gone through divorce, they are on their own, they've had to split those assets and therefore it's sort of a setback to your finances. I imagine that somehow or other there's got to be some ways you can re-find your feet again here. Any thoughts here for those who've gone through a breakdown of relationship about how they might navigate the times ahead?
100%. Funny enough, as a financial planner, one of the most common reasons that people come and see someone like me is due to life events like divorce, and divorce is one of the most common ones. And to me, it's also an opportunity because if you do find yourself in a situation where you've had that marriage breakdown, it's an opportunity to reset, potentially to need to relearn some things. And the key here is, I think, getting onto the planning process as quick as you can. And I would encourage anyone who is, going through that process of divorce to go and see a high-quality Christian advisor or even money coach who can help you to think through the issues that you need to manage, whether it's budgeting and making sure, okay, how are you going to adjust now to one income or income plus, supplement from your former spouse? How are you going to adjust to, paying bills? Because one of the big downsides of divorce is that many of the expenses now get duplicated in the sense you had one electricity bill before, now you're in two different households, so you're still paying two electricity bills. So there's all that kind of increase in costs that can occur. So it's an opportunity, I think, to sit down and go through each of the different financial elements and plan it out. My strong encouragement, though, is don't do it alone. And whether it's getting the wisdom of someone at church, the wisdom of a financial advisor, Proverbs says success comes from talking to many counsellors, in other words, talking to many people who can help you out. You'll find that many people would love to help you through that challenging season. But the key thing is to start and plan it out and work out how you're going to adjust to the new circumstances and really get a sense of where you're at. And in some cases, in some couples where one partner handled all the finances and the other partner was not really part of it, the one who didn't handle finances before often needs to go through a learning journey on how did it all work. So, for example, many listeners might think, oh, my spouse pays all the bills. I don't even know any of the passwords to get into anything. And so all of those kinds of things are very real practical issues that can hit you very suddenly. And so, to me, I'd say the key thing is if you go through this, this period in your life, go and get help and start the planning process and the learning process so that you have a good understanding of money. I want the basics. Keep it simple because a lot of people get overwhelmed by it. You don't need to be. The combination of just learning the basics and getting proper help will help you get onto track really much quicker, and it'll be literally like a weight being lifted off your shoulders because that's how many people feel when they go through these challenging seasons in their life that many of us face.
Alex, while we're talking issues around job loss, divorce, let's touch on poor health for a moment because you might be in good health right now. Again, there's this take your health seriously. What's some ways we might be able to navigate the financial challenge that comes if you have a heart attack or there might be some sort of other health issue, a cancer diagnosis or something like that? Issues around insurance or the sorts of things we might need to take into account as we're making a plan for those sorts of possibilities. What's the most important priority from your end?
Yeah, the most important priority is asking yourself the question, what would happen if my income stopped tomorrow? That's the key question most people need to be able to answer. So if we apply that concept to certain scenarios, if I'm the primary breadwinner in my house and I pass away suddenly, then the income that I would have earned now and into the future disappears permanently. So the easy financial solution to that is having life insurance in place to replace the lost income. Very similar to that is if I were to become permanently disabled and never able to work again, the consequence is essentially the same as passing away, except for possibly additional medical expenses. And once again, it's a permanent loss of income, and therefore that can be replaced using what's referred to as total and permanent disablement cover. But the big ones with health issues that I see a lot of is where someone is unable to go to work for a certain period, but they will recover. And what they need is income protection, which will pay them 75% of their income while they're unable to work. And that makes a massive difference to helping them recover, getting them back into work, taking off all the family pressure by knowing that insurance payments come in each month. And another one that's quite similar, and I've seen a lot of this particularly in the last 12 months, is where a client gets diagnosed with cancer and the insurance company pays a lump sum on a policy called critical illness or often called trauma cover, and it pays a lump sum on diagnosis. And that could be cancer, it could be a stroke, it could be a heart attack, any of these things, and it pays a lump sum. And that goes massively towards helping paying for medical expenses, but also if the spouse that's still healthy wants to take time off work to be with the one that's not healthy, then you can afford to do so because you've all of a sudden got this big lump sum repayment from an insurance company. So the good news is most health issues, even though you can't solve a health issue with money in and of itself, you can prevent the financial challenges through insurance. And the vast majority of insurances mean that you can protect from most scenarios that relate to health. In other words, whether it's loss of life, loss of ability to work ever again, temporary out of work, a lot of that can be covered and protected through insurance. And that's a very important one. And it's often the most overlooked one. I often say to people, insurance is a bit of a grudge purchase. No one likes to pay it because, they think they never use it. But I tell you what, it's the ultimate blessing to a family to have an insurance payout in the event that something happens to you. And that's the kind of conversations I have with clients when they receive all of a sudden a massive deposit in their bank account from the insurance company. So not to be overlooked.
Alex,
very, very important to have that in place.
Just a couple of minutes remaining for our conversation. And so when we're talking about the challenges that might be facing all of us, mortgage pressures, job losses, divorce, or a poor health outcome, when we're talking about God and a spiritual dimension to financial challenges that we make, a thought or two from you, just as we wrap things together for listeners who are thinking somehow or other my finances are detached from God. Not necessarily the case. What are your thoughts here on the spiritual dimension on finance?
Yeah, well, look, I would argue that money is deeply spiritual. And often, I think what happens is God loves us so much, and that he often allows things to come into our life to expose our heart. God is in the character building business. He wants to change our hearts. He wants us to draw close to him, to learn to trust him. And so often he'll allow certain things, financial challenges to enter into our life in order to expose our heart. Now, he's not trying to expose our heart so he can see what it's like, because he already knew. He's doing it so that we know, because often we're not self-aware, and we're often not aware of what we're like, whether we've fallen in love with money, whether we're greedy, all those things we don't necessarily notice until challenges come upon. So to me, if we do find ourselves in a position of financial challenge, is to sit back and actually ask God, why? Why is this happening? Are you trying to show me something? Are you trying to teach me something? What do I need to do differently? And that therein lies, I think, the opportunity. Because often you'll hear people when they've been through financial challenges, when they look back 2 or 3 years later, they'll say what a blessing it was in hindsight, because they learned so much. They learned about themselves. They learned how to use money better. They learned all these things as a result of going through that challenging period. So I know it often feels when you're going through that fire, it's not fun, but that process is one of often refining us, bringing us closer to God, and allowing us to trust him better and to learn his ways. I mean, as I say, when you do things God's way, you're going to find you encounter problems a lot less, because you're doing things his way. And maybe that's what he's trying to show us. And I think in tough times like this, that's what he's trying to show many of us.
There's adjustment to make, and that's what I guess aligning with God's values, becoming kingdom-minded. There's an adjustment, and sometimes the adjustment happens out of a crisis that we might be facing. Hey, for those who would like to connect with Alex Cook, and I think there's quite a lot of things we would have liked to have covered in today's conversation. There's a few things that just upset the flow a little earlier on, but Alex Cook is founder of Wealth with Purpose. His ministry is to help people like you and I to honour God with our finances, teaching sound financial skills. I always like to give a website where you can go to connect with Alex, and that is wealthwithpurpose.com. wealthwithpurpose.com, and Alex has a whole lot of free ebooks, the My Toolkit. There are free videos, there are podcast contents on his website, so wealthwithpurpose.com. You can follow Alex on Facebook and on Twitter, and there's even an Ask Alex at wealthwithpurpose.com email if you have a personal question that you'd like to run by Alex. Alex, it's always good getting your insights. I want to thank you so much for taking some time to share those with listeners today on 2020.
Thanks, Tim. Great to be with you again.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.